Over 63 million Indians around the country don't have access to safe drinking water. Over 10 years ago, my colleagues and I, we decided to work on this problem. We identified villages, we paired them with donors, and we built water kiosks. We built them in over 500 villages around the country. What we are most proud of as a team is that we managed to convince the local communities that they need to part with a small sum of money that goes towards the operation and maintenance expenses of these plants. The idea was to eventually make this platform sustainable. Today, this model serves over 600,000 people. And while we've got a lot of attention, perhaps what was most gratifying for us was that this model has been accepted by several state governments. And while I was working on this big issue of safe drinking water, I started to encounter something a little bit more sinister. I started to encounter the stories of farmer suicides. Intrigued, I decided to investigate. And what I found absolutely shocked me. On an average, over the last 15 years, we've lost 40 farmers daily to suicides. This is the story of one such farmer couple, Mohanachari and his wife. They started farming about 9 years ago in a village not very far from Hyderabad, in a village called Rangapur. They first started with paddy and chili. But successive years of drought, unseasonal rain, and pests rendered their efforts to a naught. In order to gain more control over the key resource, water, they decided to dig a well. They didn't dig one, they dug 20 wells, and yet they could not strike water. Farming no longer being an option, they decided to move on to livestock. They opened a poultry with over 12,000 chicken. Within a couple of years, they had to shut that too because of irregular payments from the procurement companies and poor yields. They then moved on to sheep. They bought 200 sheep, raising more money from their friends and near ones, but within a year, tragedy struck when a virus attack happened in their village, wiping out over half their livestock of sheep. They started to get really desperate now, and the debtors were on their case asking for their money back. So with no options left, they started to sell their assets one by one. But the debts were much greater. In desperation, just last month, they reached out to the local banks to ask for an extension of their loan tenure. Unfortunately, that request was denied. And that was the last straw. 24th of June, just over a month ago, when a milk vendor was passing by their home, he found them dead. They'd hung themselves the night before. All they left behind was a 3-page suicide note explaining the circumstances under which they had to commit this final act. What led to Mohanachari's suicide? Like millions of small farmers in India, Mohanachari didn't have access to basic information on how to protect his crop from pests, which crops to grow when water is scarce, how to get timely medical assistance for his livestock, how to perhaps conserve water and replenish aquifers, how to get a better price for his produce. If he had access to some bits of this information, perhaps him and his wife would still be with us today. And that's the ground reality. But apart from that, we also need to understand the larger forces at play. How many of these suicides are caused due to the artificial need for us to keep the food and commodity prices low? In a country like India, is subsidizing urban food the right policy when over 60% of the people still depend on agriculture for their incomes? And what's the plan to address the fast depleting water resources? And this is on the back of unsustainable agricultural practices. How do we respond to all of these complexities? Yes, on the one hand, large-scale policy reform is absolutely essential, it's imperative. But I also believe, on the other hand, we need to start many small experiments that are rooted in local communities. To do just this, I quit my water company last year to start an organization called ReLife. Here, we intend to run many experiments to address the twin issues of unsustainable farming and the water crisis. In first of the experiments, we intend to put a number of sensors in the farms and the local communities. These sensors will measure a few things. First, soil moisture. Second, the amount of water consumed in these farms. Third, the precipitation and the ability for us to collect this rain. And then the recharge of all of these local small water aquifers. The idea and hope is that the interrelatedness of water in all of its spaces, the soil, the small and large tanks, the streams and lakes, and eventually the river systems will become more clear, especially for the local communities. We intend to put this aggregated information in key parts of the village, the community halls, the schools, the health centers. We also intend to project out the positive and negative effects in the future of their current water and agricultural practices. We believe that a combination of these projections visible to them and access to real-time information on their current water resources will instigate the behavior changes that are needed. Not just instigate, but also sustain it. So this is just one example, and we'll need many such small experiments to be run in order for us to solve this issue. The other belief that we have is that we need to really improve the bar of data collection. We need to create an information-rich context in local communities. This will go a long way in increasing accountability of several institutions, not just the government, but also the private sector. The burden of solving this problem is not that of the government alone. It needs participation from all of us. The complex issues of today need collaboration on a scale that we've never done before. We need all players from the private sector, the public sector, the government, the policymakers, civil society, and entrepreneurs to come together. The question is, can we bring to bear our collective wisdom and, more importantly, our collective humanity in order to ensure that lives of farmers like Mohanachari are not lost again? I believe we can.